Good morning, intrepid, climate-resistant, brave Washingtonians. If this were, of course, Boston or Anchorage, no one would have noticed, but in Washington, it's more or less shut the city down. And anyone who's on Metro knows it was empty this morning, which is kind of nice. But so you all are obviously particularly motivated. So we've seen one force of nature out there. You will experience another force of nature in a minute. Our new colleague, Katina Michael, who's just joined us at ASU from the University of Wollongong. Most of you I've seen before, but not everyone, so just some quick contextualization. This is part of an ongoing series of seminars focused at bringing in people from Arizona State University, who we work with, our colleagues, to talk about really concrete ways of thinking about challenges in science, technology, and society and policy, and intervening to improve our governance capacities, our capacities to manage the ingenuity that we constantly unleash on the world through our scientific and technological capabilities, often without a lot of thought beforehand about what then happens. Katina will certainly throw herself into the middle of a particular maelstrom that we've created for ourselves around ubiquitous surveillance, the disappearance of privacy, the enormity of information, and so on. But the way we run these things, as most of you know, is a short talk, hopefully to both provoke and give you some very concrete ideas about things that you can do moving forward in the science, technology, policy realm. Then conversation among all of us, and Katina for another half hour or so. We'll wrap up probably shortly after 10, since we're getting started a little late, but invite everyone to continue to stay, continue the conversation. You have a workshop here, though, that's starting immediately afterwards, though, and I don't know whether most of you are planning to stay for that in any case. But so let me just turn it over to Katina and let her take it from there. So thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Daniel. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming despite the snow. Today we're going to talk about location-based technologies, emerging technologies that are potentially not location-based but more visual-based, how the law in America treats location technologies, how we go through warrant processes to collect data about individuals, sometimes how the law works and doesn't work to protect citizen rights, the process of getting a warrant, and the emerging confrontations we have today, going from handset-based technologies that collect data as you traverse the world versus technologies that are static. For instance, facial recognition technologies, which are now new forms of location-based devices. So during the last decade or so, location tracking and monitoring applications have proliferated. We didn't have them previously. They were specialist devices, particularly with the emergence of geographic information systems, the linkage of sensors on individuals, on things, and on buildings. We were able to track and monitor. Unsophisticated devices used to exist in the 60s and 70s. Devices so named as beacons that could roughly identify someone in a particular location driving a particular vehicle. They were not on the individual, but on things the individual drove or interacted with. And of course, this was an era of telecommunications interception and access as well. But you couldn't enter a home. You had to wiretap from an external point. You couldn't trespass the home. There are even cases dating back to the 60s and 70s where law enforcement officers were using every means they could not to put their hand across into the internal area of a home, because that would be considered trespassing. So they would think about things like, is a garage part of a house? Is a driveway part of a house? Although telecommunications interception at the hub could be done, and therefore wiretapping occur. We're now living in a completely different era where Internet of Things devices are being invited into our homes. So we've gone through 30 to 40 years of saying no trespass, no further. You can't collect data from inside the home. This is a private location. This is a private conversation. And we distinguish very nicely between the public space and the private space. And that kind of space is blurring at the moment. So the question is, we've spent so many years, so many decades trying to perfect interception, trying to perfect the rights of citizens, not trespassing as law enforcement agents, going through the right process to get a warrant, executing that warrant in the right way. And now all of a sudden, we're inviting surveillance into our homes. So common devices like Alexa are now in our homes. There's no need to actually even put a wiretap there. We've got surveillance devices listening to everything we say, whether it's through our Samsung TV, which can actually view in and listen in, if you've read the 70 pages of terms and conditions, if it is an internet-enabled Samsung TV, for instance, through to Alexa devices that can hear your conversations from the moment you wake up and just before you talk about that particular command, like play this kind of song or this song. And these things are now available in transcripts. And we've seen this retrospective use of data through very basic technologies like Fitbit devices, like Opal cards, like transit cards in Australia, to show which direction you're traveling in. Is it north, south, east, or west? And this is all evidence towards particular confirmation that someone was involved or possibly involved in a case. The two words that are very important here are probable cause. And law enforcement agents have been able to be awarded a warrant if there has been a probable cause, and we can put those into particular crime groups, such as narcotics trafficking and other things, murder, suspected abuse and other things, of which there needs to be some probable cause for you to collect data. And another interesting point is to look at the difference between covert and overt tracking. Covert tracking is when you are unaware that someone is trailing your location. Overt tracking is when you're completely aware. In fact, someone has a sign saying, we are currently monitoring you as you go through a shopping mall. And location-based technologies can be handset-based. For example, a GPS sensor embedded in your smartphone. Or they can be measures like signal strength or triangulation or assisted GPS, which uses more than one capability to determine your location. So either you're wearing the device or carrying it like this, and the sensor is inside the device, or the triangulation happens through the network, so network-based or handset-based. Interestingly, companies who offer these location technologies have to have the ability to understand how you are using your smartphone. So for service dimensioning, teletraffic monitoring, the ability to ensure that there is no congestion in the network, service providers and operators, ICT giants, internet search companies, argue that they must be able to monitor what you are doing, your behavior, and must be able to collect data from you in order to be able to serve you better, service provisioning. And often that is the excuse provided, and it's a valid excuse. A service provider can't bill you if they don't know how you're using your smartphone or using the services and applications on that phone. However, the level of invasiveness is continually encroaching privacy rights of individuals across the world. In fact, at a conference only the other day at the International Symposium on Technology and Society, someone argued If only even Google knew how their algorithm worked. And that was an interesting comment to start looking into. Well, who knows what is actually being collected? Which group in an organization, like a service provider? Because there are silos in organizations, people responsible for ensuring the billing of systems, the billing systems, people for ensuring authentication, people for ensuring marketing and sales. Who knows what? And what is actually occurring is a very interesting question. And over time, if you see the rhetoric of big providers, they come out with statements which are quite blurry. Oh, we need to clarify what we do. We don't take the location history, we take the last location point. Or we need to revise what we do because, in fact, yes, if you're using the old API, you would be gaining access to all the location history versus just the last point. And oh yes, if we tell you on our app that you've switched off location tracking, we don't necessarily mean that we're not tracking you, you've just switched it off. And it's only when organizations are caught out and shamed do we see a response. It is only when organizations are fined that we see a response. Some of the early location privacy breaches by companies like Google and Microsoft and others were only fined a very small amount, into the thousands. In fact, in 2009, I wrote an article for the Journal of Location-Based Services and thought it was quite farcical. When I did the conversion from South Korea's currency to the American dollar, they would just find, a couple of thousand US American dollars. That's not going to hurt a multi-billion-dollar company. But we're seeing much heavier fines being delivered today into the billions. Interestingly, they're not making the news as much as I thought they would be, but increasingly now with the GDPR in the EU, we will see heftier fines and people beginning to listen. In 2005, we created this very high-level architecture looking at something we termed hierarchical positioning systems, which looked at how does location determination work. And we were considering from a level of the global theatre through GPS. So if someone was outside, could a GPS, a satellite, a global positioning system locate someone if they had an app enabled and a sensor in their smartphone, right through to if we were searching using a cellular network, for example, like a 3G network, a UMTS network, right down to whether they were in building using a wireless LAN or some other IP-based infrastructure, right through to the smartphone device or even potentially an embedded chip. And while that may have seemed very far-fetched 13 years ago, we are seeing people experiment today with implantables. They are not global positioning-based embedded systems, but they are able to interact with smartphones, for instance, that are NFC or RFID, radio frequency identification readable. And the whole point was to denote whether someone was outdoors, right through to indoors, and whether you wanted to do a precise location fix, because the question we had was whether smartphones being transferable would not be enough for law enforcement in the future. And we do already see individuals, for example, convicted pedophiles, who are tagged with 3M anklet devices that do locate them, and people are under house arrest. So every phone has a unique identity module. Our SIM card can be taken out of a smartphone and placed in another device, like a tablet or another smartphone. And the IMSI, the International Mobile Subscriber Identity, is the individual unique number of a handset identifier. And this may be referred to as an IMEI, International Mobile Equipment Identity. Apple, for instance, even has a specific unique device identifier that they use to track their users. And there is a file that a user can actually access on their iPhone, which does determine where they have traversed given a location breadcrumb. And of course, when companies collect this data, law enforcement agencies are likely to ask for it. And some of the approaches in the big data world have been about pre-processing. If you don't require the data, don't collect it. Therefore, it is not available for viewing by others. But we seem to be embedding more and more sensors into everything around us, including our smartphones, which have an average of 14 different sensors, if I was to name them all. Everything from magnetometers to temperature sensors to altimeters, to determine whether someone is running, someone is stopping, someone is out of breath, and pretty much which direction they're traveling in, how fast they're traveling, so speed, distance, time estimates. So because of public safety and the benefits this ability to locate someone gives us, we now have a requirement in most developed nations, and in particular in the US, that someone can be located if they have a smartphone and they've called 911 or 000 in Australia to about 7.8 meters with a 95% confidence level. So roughly on average, we can say that someone can be located down to about 10 meters at any point in time if they're using their smartphone. And that estimate can be off due to weather like today, clutter, if we're in an in-building area, highly dense and tall skyscrapers, and other places that have moisture that can affect the confidence that you'll get down to 8 meters. And while we don't realize this, the value chain to actually offer a service, but you are also interacting with content providers, application providers, handset providers, service providers, and all of these people come together to offer you a response to your request. You know, where am I? And I want to go to this place, and I not want. And surveillance used to be visual. You used to have to track someone in a public space and follow them. You know, those old Dick Tracy shows and comics. But things are now digital, and we've moved just from microphones being placed and planted like bugs to surveil towards more the transmission of images and videos via remote locations. So many Pokemon Go users wouldn't realize, but when they've consented to the terms and conditions to play the game, actually you are granting the company Pokemon Go access to your camera and your video capability. So is the photo you're taking in the augmented space also shared? Are the coordinates of the photo you're taking in the augmented space shared? Is it shared with Pokemon Go's company owner, or is it shared with the subsidiary affiliates? Is it shared with McDonald's partnering with Pokemon Go? Where's it going to? And gamers are beginning to ask these questions on Reddit and on different blogs. You know, how safe is my information? What do they actually see? What is actually being given away? And we can capture an individual's location at a point of time. We can do real-time monitoring of a succession of locations. We can do predictive tracking. We can do retrospective tracking. These are all different capabilities that we can actually apply to location information. And so the term my husband coined, Uberveillance, is really about the who you are through the SIM card that you're carrying, the subscriber identity module, to where you are. The location sensor denotes where you are. And because we have jam-packed the smartphones with other sensors, we also know what condition you're in. We probably even know whether you have sweaty palms, whether your heart rate is high or low. And for any of you doubting this, just if you have an Android device, go to your Samsung Health app and have a good look at some of the incredible capabilities that we have now in our phones. And so human activity monitoring is the capacity and the capability that we've created through these very smart devices. We also have borrowed from the law enforcement work on situational awareness, because what we're finding is the tracking very much and the monitoring gives us an ability to know the state of someone and how that state is changing over time. So it provides context. which is often missing when we just get location coordinates and nothing else, without a message, for instance. We can argue that Uberveillance actually gives us a greater amount of time. It's a over and above surveillance. It's an exaggerated surveillance. It's not just your normal, let me see what this person is doing. And we have run studies with very chunky Magellan GPS devices on individuals back in 2005 and seen how much humans are creatures of habit. So if you can denote someone's behavior over a 7-day period, most likely you'll be able to denote it over a month and a year. People are creatures of habit. And we've contrasted the quantitative data that you see here with daily diary entries. And then you can map these entries and come out with a location breadcrumb. This is before the introduction of smartphones. And today you can do very sophisticated things with better resolution imagery coming from the satellites with pinpoint accuracy, I would say, and with a plethora of information, more than we've ever had before. And so we look at technologies like Google Earth, which give us the ability to apply a data set on top, track someone's route right to the front door. And I haven't included the originating point here. This is one of many samples that we had when we ran a 4-week study of our students wearing different devices that denoted their GPS with ethics approval. You could do this. I've done many an experiment like this. These are some of the trackers. You can even put them in vehicles, and this becomes a sticky point when we look at the US legislation, particularly the Fourth Amendment. In some cases, it has been considered physically intrusive to enter a car, to place a tracking device into the car. In other court cases, in the lower courts, it has been said it is okay to do that. And so what we have at the moment are many cases dating back to when these technologies proliferated, which give us different rulings. And this is the kind of level of detail of information you can get from smartphones, from GPS tracking devices. You can see a longitude and latitude, an altitude, temperature. This device only cost us $50. And you could actually place it in a vehicle and overtly gather data for 30 days. And then after 30 days, the memory would be an issue. So the Uberveillance is really the ability to get into someone's head by their physical behaviors and traits. We used to say through George Orwell's 1984 that, you know, this was the sacred space. No one could trespass it. At least that's what we were told. But when we have rhetoric now from major players who are saying we want to be the third half of your brain, they actually mean it. And if I know where you've been, I know who you are, I know what condition you're in, I probably know what you're thinking. The difficulty with Uberveillance is that if we roll this out as a mechanism for identifying terrorists, for identifying people at risk of taking their life, for identifying children who are being abused, we run the risk of placing our faith in technology which is not always correct. We can manipulate information, we can misrepresent it, it can be wrong. And so while we're striving for this eye in the sky that can see all things, that is omniscient, at best I could guarantee you we have omnipresence, at best, but the all-knowing, all-seeing, which we're striving for and believe we're going to create, is actually not possible. Because even in someone who suicides, you will never know the reason why, but also you can't preemptively know whether they have regretted their action at the point of taking their life. That is only something for the personal individual to know. So someone may be planning an attack, of course, they can be charged on a plan, but the final execution has not occurred. And what I don't want to get into is a life of Minority Report. I'm going to skip ahead. By the way, this is what a warrant looks like. 2-page, very simple. An application by a federal law enforcement officer or an attorney for the government shows there is a reason to believe that a person, property, or object described above has been involved and likely will continue to be involved in the criminal activity identified in the application, etc., etc. You identify the date and time of tracking the device that has been installed, for how long you want the individual or the item to be covertly placed to track the individual, and so forth. And that is either a given or not given. I'm going to skip the very detailed case law that I've prepared, and I'll make these slides available to everyone. We can also talk about it in a moment. But pretty much, we're talking about search and seizure here, the Fourth Amendment. So I'll skip through and get to some of the controversies with the sticking points of those cases that I flashed up. And a lot of the cases have argued, these are the main points, where the rulings have come out. Was the surveillance on a public road? Okay? Was the surveillance in a driveway? Was the surveillance in a garage? Interestingly, one of the court cases identified that retrospectively, after having tailed someone with a covert device in their vehicle, they would have had to throw the data out unless they removed the coordinates while the individual's car was parked in the garage, because it was trespassing inside the home. And the Fourth Amendment protects property, the home, from trespass. So on that technicality, they manipulated the data to make it admissible in a court of law by removing the coordinates that indicated the man had the vehicle stationed in his garage. Was there probable cause? Had the warrant expired, or was it active in a given area when data was collected? In the United States versus Jones case, the warrant had expired by a day. It was actually granted in Washington, D.C., and intrusively, the device was placed in the vehicle in a place called Maryland, as we all know. Is it one and the same? Is it the same district? So on 2 counts, one on a very minor geographic technicality of description in the actual warrant, and the second being that the warrant had expired by a day, Jones was able to kick out the evidence from convicting him. However, they found another way to do so. Was the tracking for a reasonable period of time? Some of the anti-terrorist laws across the world actually allow governments to track someone post an arrest for up to 140, 200 days. It's quite a lengthy time. Here, when we're talking about warrants, usually the process is a short time, between 7 and 28 days. So if you've only said you're going to track someone for 7 days, going beyond that actually nullifies the data collection. Was the tracking with an unsophisticated device? And what is an unsophisticated device? And if it was, yep, you don't need a warrant, right? Some of these court cases actually identified that. You don't need a warrant if the device is not accurate, because maybe it is and maybe it isn't. And what really constitutes accuracy, really, when we're talking about location-based services? Is tracking a spouse's car illegal? No, not according to one judge. Is tracking an employee legal if they are suspected of internal misconduct? It's legal. Yeah, no one's going to dispute it, according to one judge. Right? And you'll see that if you read the notes of the case law, we'll see that. Jumping ahead, and just before we break for discussion, if you allow me another maybe 5 minutes. What about industry? So government agencies, law enforcement agencies have to go through all this process to gain access to a vehicle, for instance, or data collected on a smartphone. But what about industry? I alluded before that industry collects a lot of data. I can tell you government agencies are very jealous. And one of the ways they're circumventing the need to keep knocking on Google's door, on Microsoft's door, is by saying, you know what, we'll find our own way of very intrusive data collection. We'll start to collect data from lampposts. We'll start to collect data from smart vehicles. We'll start to collect data from smart meters, smart homes. We'll start to infiltrate in other ways that don't make us rely on industry for evidence. And this is a new wave that is occurring simultaneously with breakthroughs in Internet of Things technologies, but also government's ability to now harness the power of AI to supposedly conduct accurate facial recognition hits and matches. So imagine we are all outside going about our business in Washington, and we are being photographed as we go around our day. And our behaviors look abnormal to the AI, the artificial intelligence algorithm. And we're tapped on the shoulder by the local police, and we're logged onto Palantir automatically. This data collection hasn't required your consent. You haven't signed any terms and conditions. The government and law enforcement agencies no longer wish to have to rely on industry for their data. But look what industry is doing regardless, which will just increase the plethora of information that we can access. Google Latitude, location history breadcrumbs. Some of you don't realize if you have Android devices, you haven't turned off your location history. Does Google keep your location history? Back in 2011, they denied that they kept breadcrumbs. And then they changed their story and said, we only keep the last location, your last waypoint. Because these breadcrumbs are taken every 10 to 30 seconds, dependent on the setup. So it was only your last location, not really your history. But they had to come out and admit that. iPhone keeps record of everywhere you go. Privacy fees raised as researchers reveal file on iPhone that stores location coordinates and timestamps of owners' movements. Did you know that? And that's a visualization of one of the examples these researchers identified of one iPhone and the location breadcrumbing history of the user. The popular times. How do you think Google generates that on Google Maps? Interestingly, on a Sunday morning, when I first arrived in Arizona, I used Google Maps, which I always do, to do what I do on Sunday mornings. Now, in this building, in this location, there were about 7 different businesses. The following week, when I searched again, because I was in a different place to start walking, it pinpointed me directly to one of the 7 businesses on that location. Fascinating. How did it know I was going to go there? That is the level we're talking about. And while Google states that it is anonymous data collection that is driving congestion and popular times information, where you can anonymize, you can also do the opposite. So if you want to read later about visit durations, wait times, popular times, you can do so in your own time. But now we have Street View cars, and of course these were sniffing iMac details, MAC addresses, forgive me, as the Street View vehicle was going through in 2013. Again, Google was slapped on the back of the hand for sniffing out MAC addresses, right? Which were open and not protected securely. How many people out there actually even know what a MAC address is? But this information, email addresses and other personal identifiable data was being collected. Oops, the car did it. Really? And we think about the implications for smart cars and driverless vehicles into the future. Verizon was ordered by the FBI to give over millions of records of information. They did so for a period of 3 months. There was no uproar on the street. The data was just handed over. Billboards that see you. This is now the beginning of the collection of behavior, gait, other physical trait data as we move around. What if every billboard was smart? What if every billboard was a CCTV camera? What if every billboard got more than just, your potential marketing habits or buying behaviors? Here's one gamer. Do we have control over map location privacy when adding friends? I can't find any info about safety. How Niantic is profiting off tracking where you go while playing Pokemon Go. This is called foot driving, ladies and gentlemen. Street View is like the car driving, right? going through and getting household level data. Foot driving is when you smartly identify a mechanism for data collection by the users that give you your system. We beckon the ability to surveil our surrounds and give it over freely. We're actually becoming drones and data collection machines as humans. It's drones humanus. It's us becoming the data collectors. Forget the bots becoming the data collectors. Humans have become sensors in this push for more information. Let's see how we can manipulate a crowd to go to place A and B. Let's see how many people we can get to do that. Let's identify who would go. What are their demographic details? Are they male or female? Do they come from low socioeconomic groups? Who are they interacting with? Oh, thank you. I'm Niantic. I take your data and I do what I want with it. Did you know I used it? Oh, I didn't have to tell you. Pokemon Go is fun. It's entertainment, right, for the masses. But governments want this capability. Law enforcement agencies would love this capability. And that's why we have 50,000 Axon devices now distributed to offices across the US, wearable technologies that are also visually recording citizens daily. We recently discovered that the Pokemon Go account creation process on iOS erroneously requests full access permission for the user's Google account. Google has verified that no other information has been received or accessed by Pokemon Go or Niantic. Google will soon reduce Pokemon Go's permission to only the basic profile data that Pokemon Go needs, and users do not need to take any action themselves. And yet, has anyone ever read that terms and conditions? No, we just want the game. The secret history of the FBI's battle against Apple reveals the Bureau's mistakes. Google records your location even when you tell it not to. A recent story, August this year. Your phone knows where you've been, and the government wants to know too. Google clarifies how it tracks you even if location history is turned off. Why aren't we angry? If you're using an Android phone, Google may be tracking every move you make. And these are all different stories. You can see the dates. They all pertain to different breaches in people's privacy. Every single one of these was a different case dating back to 2007, with Google Latitude starting in 2009. We even have people in shopping malls tracking your movements in shopping malls. Path Intelligence began this in 2007 in the UK. You don't realize, but there's a little card that tells you that this tracking is occurring when you enter a shopping mall, like you can see. We can't even see the CCTV cameras anymore because they're embedded in the infrastructure, right? In the lighting systems. Little plaques on pylons telling you, we are tracking you anonymously. And sometimes we might be able to track you a bit further than the shopping mall as well. We know, and we need this information so we can tell the people who are leasing the buildings and the space how much they should be paying for the leasing space. This is rampant, this system. Most shopping malls today that are big are doing this. But recently there was a comeback. In ruling on cell phone location data, Supreme Court makes statement on digital privacy. 5-4, the Supreme Court voted in favor of warrants for location tracking. Google at risk of a $3 billion fine over location tracking. $3 billion. Now we're talking. Now the companies may respond and may listen up to stop tracking us without our consent. Google responds to location stalking outcry by tweaking words on its BS support page. To catch a robber, the FBI attempted an unprecedented grab for location data from Google. You see what's going on is a tug of war. But the citizen doesn't really prominently present in this case, right? What's happened to the citizen voice? So on that note, I don't think we have to look at China. We should just look at Australia and the US. China's going all guns blazing with regards to the capabilities, but I think actually we've got to look at what's going on here in the States, in Australia, in Canada even. That is a country that does respect privacy and is trying good things. The UK and New Zealand even, you know, the Five Eyes sharing. So I hope you've left more with an impression, more than anything else, on what we need to do to address these problems, which are very complex. Thank you.